Chapter 1. The March from Steel Spire. The sky over Ostermark was the color of old bruises, gray, purple, rotting yellow, boiling low and slow above the war-scarred lands. Beneath it, the Legion of the Obsidian Sun returned, their blackened banners fluttering in the wind like charred wings. The wind howled through the snow-caked valleys of the north, whispering secrets too old for men. They did not sing, they did not speak. Only the drumbeat of boots, iron-shod and blood-stained, hammered a slow rhythm against the frozen road as they approached the gates of Steel Spire, the fortress city that loomed ahead like a mausoleum carved from despair. Steel Spire, the Empire's last eastern fang. It clung to the jagged hills like a rusted crown, its spiked battlements bristling with artillery, gargoyles, and steel pennants left to rot in the wind. Runes etched in dwarfen stone flickered faintly with old warding magics, but nothing could keep the scent of war from settling on the high walls. The city watched its warriors return, but no horn was blown, no bells rang. The silence was respect, or fear. At the head of the column rode General Vortigan, his warhorse as black as night, eyes glowing with the touch of alchemical rage. The general sat tall in the saddle, his steel armor scored and burned, the pelt of a mutated wolf draped across his shoulders. His face was carved in stillness, gray-eyed and gaunt. Only the dried blood on his jaw betrayed how close he'd come to death in the last campaign. Vortigan had held back 3 war bands of chaos with nothing but fire, grit, and iron discipline. He had driven his blade through the skull of a Nurgle-corrupted warlord while his lungs filled with ash. He had buried friends. He had watched men beg for death. And now he led what was left of his legion home. Behind him, Captain Alric Grendel bore the standard, a once majestic banner of a golden sun on a field of black, now tattered, crusted with gore, and trailing like a flayed skin. Grendel was a monolith of a man, built of stone and gristle, with storm-gray eyes and a nose broken more times than it was worth counting. His breastplate was dented over the heart. He'd taken a blow meant for the general just 4 days past. He trusted Vortigan like a brother, but in the quiet hours, when the screams of the dying still echoed behind his eyes, something had shifted. Doubt took root, and Grendel was not a man given to doubt. To their left rode Magister Talia Krell, a violet-robed spectre on a pale skeletal steed. Her staff glowed with faint runes, the air around her warping in subtle eddies. She was amethyst order, death magic, and even the most hardened soldiers gave her a wide berth. She had summoned the spirits of the dead to turn the tide in the pale ravine. She had drained the life from men with a glance, but it was her silence that unnerved them most. She stared at the sky often, whispered to herself, listened to voices no one else could hear. Now, she frowned, her pale face pinched with tension. "The winds are wrong," she murmured. "They blow backward. They whisper betrayal." Grendel glanced her way but said nothing. At the rear rode Lieutenant Corwin Halbrecht, his polished plate catching what little light filtered through the storm clouds. Young, handsome, and hungry, Halbrecht had survived far better than most. His face was unscarred, his crimson sash untouched by soot or blood. His hands were calloused, yes, but they had gripped too many maps and not enough hilts. Yet he carried himself like a prince, because in some ways he was one. Backed by shadowy interests in Altdorf, nobles who had grown tired of Vortigan's independent power, Halbrecht's presence in the Legion was both political and poisonous. He smiled often. Too often, especially when others were bleeding. "Straighten your lines, you lazy bastards," he snapped at the men. "You march before Steel Spire's eyes. Show some pride." A soldier at the end of the line coughed blood onto the snow. Halbrecht did. Shameful. Another man growled under his breath. "Cocksure peacock." Albrecht heard. He turned, drew his saber in a blur of silver, and opened the man's throat before the insult was finished. Blood sprayed, hot and steaming, across the frozen dirt. The column didn't even slow. "Let that be a lesson," Halbrecht said calmly, wiping his blade. "You dishonor the dead when you forget your discipline." The gates of Steel Spire yawned open slowly, screeching like a dying god. Beyond them stood hundreds of townsfolk, some cheering half-heartedly, others clutching candles or muttering prayers. They had expected glory. What they saw instead was the face of war. Hollow-eyed, wounded, scorched. Vortigan dismounted with the creak of old wounds. A scribe approached, flanked by city guards and 2 witch hunters. The scribe, a weasel of a man with a soft voice, bowed stiffly. "General Vortigan, welcome home. Lord Intendant von Meyenstein awaits your report." "We bring blood and ash," Vortigan said flatly. "There's your report." Behind him, Grendel spat into the mud. Krell stared at the spires of the city, her lips moving soundlessly. Halbrecht rode forward with a rehearsed smile. "Steel Spire shall rise on the back of our triumph," he said, eyes glinting. "We have returned." But as the gates slammed shut behind them, the soldiers knew something deeper than snow chilled the marrow. There was no triumph here, only silence, suspicion, and the scent of rot beneath the stone. And high above, unseen by most, the crows circled the spire. Chapter 2. A Blade in the Snow. The World's Edge Mountains swallowed the sun by mid-afternoon, reducing the winding pass to a corridor of dying light and clawing wind. Jagged peaks towered like the ribs of a colossal corpse, their crests lost to swirling ash-gray clouds. Below, in the valley throat known as Karg's Hollow, the legion of the Obsidian Sun halted beneath a sky that threatened blood. Here, at the edge of empire and wilderness, the snow lay deep and undisturbed, an untouched altar, and General Vortigan, ever faithful in ritual, declared it holy ground. "Tonight," he said, his voice rasped and dry, "we give thanks to Sigmar for carrying us through fire. We cleanse ourselves of what we carried from the north." He dismounted, planting his warhammer, Judicator, into the ground before a crude stone altar formed from shattered ruins. His armor creaked as he knelt, bare hands pressed into the snow, whispering ancient litanies beneath his breath. Around him, soldiers formed a loose circle, their expressions unreadable in the flickering torchlight. Some bowed, some prayed, others watched the shadows too closely. Magister Talia Krell stood apart as always, staff buried in the snow beside her. Her pale eyes were fixed on the wind. The amethyst winds howled with urgency, whispering things that should not be spoken. Spirits stirred beneath the ice, voices shrieking warnings through her skull. She shivered, not from the cold. "Something waits," she muttered. "Something wears our skin." Grendel stood behind the circle, sword resting on his shoulder. His gaze swept the tree line. Years of war had taught him the scent of ambush, and tonight the air stank of it. Halbrecht, resplendent even in winter-frosted armor, stood beside his chosen officers, arms folded, head lowered in mock reverence. But his eyes moved constantly, calculating, judging. His fingers rested on the hilt of his blade, even in prayer. Then it happened. It began with a flicker, a movement, no more than a shadow slithering across the firelight. Vortigan's words faltered. A figure stepped from the edge of the torch circle. No name, no face, only black cloth, bronze mask, and a dagger in each hand. Another followed. Then another. 3. They moved like smoke. The first struck fast and low, sliding across the snow like a serpent. The dagger, curved and jagged, buried itself under Vortigan's ribs. The general gasped, not in pain, but in surprise. Steam poured from the wound as warp taint sizzled against flesh. The second assassin stepped behind him and slashed across his throat. The blades sang through muscle, cartilage, and artery. Blood sprayed in a wide arc, pattering hot on the snow, steam rising in frantic coils. The circle of soldiers froze in horror as their commander collapsed, choking on his own blood. Judicar fell with a thud, the haft snapping in half against the frozen altar. Then came the scream. Not from Vortigan, from the Legion. Steel rasped from sheaths. Orders died on tongues. Chaos consumed them. Grendel was the first to move. He charged like a charging bull, sword swinging wide. His blade cleaved through the first assassin's shoulder, splitting rib and spine, sending a spray of blood across the snow like red mist. The body hit the ground twitching. The bronze mask rolled, blank-eyed, into the fire. The second assassin leapt backward, hurling a vial into the flames. The fire erupted in a violet flash. Dozens were blinded. Screams followed as flame licked across flesh and fur. The third vanished into the chaos, disappeared between soldiers like fog through cracks. Talia chanted, her voice raw and harsh. Magic pulsed from her staff. A ghostly hand rose from the snow and dragged the second assassin into the earth, bones cracking, flesh screaming, swallowed whole by death itself. But it was too late. Vortigan lay still, crimson bubbling from his ruined throat. His eyes were wide, confused, as if he couldn't believe it, that it would end like this. Not in battle, not in fire, but on his knees during prayer. "No!" Grendel roared. He dropped beside the body, hands bloody, trying to press the wound shut with sheer will. "No, no, 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 no!" Halbrek stood, unmoving, then raised his voice above the carnage. "Secure the perimeter. Find the third. Do not let that bastard vanish into the dark." But the third assassin was already gone. When the fires died and the blood steamed to stillness, 5 bodies remained. Vortigan, 2 of his honor guard, and 2 masked attackers. No sigils, no tattoos. Their flesh was mutilated, warped, but not corrupted in the usual sense. Their equipment bore no mark of chaos, and yet their blades whispered with warp taint, jagged veins of green glass and blackened iron, impossible to forge without dark craft. Talia examined one of the blades with gloved fingers. This was no beastman's work, not even a true cultist. This blade, this was designed to kill a soul, not just a body. Grendel stood in silence beside the general's corpse. "I will burn the mountains down to find who did this," he said. Halbrecht was less sentimental. "Chaos, then," he said, "or one of the border cults. That's all this is." Grendel looked up. "You think chaos sends assassins without banners, without boasts? They want to be seen." "Then what, Captain Altdorf?" Halbrecht replied coldly. "You'd accuse the elector counts?" Grendel stared at him a long time. "I didn't say that." "But you did." Silence fell like snow. That night the Legion stood divided. Whispers passed like plague through the camp. Chaos or betrayal? A foreign plot or an inside job? The answers were few, the questions were many, but one thing was certain. The Obsidian Sun had lost its light, and in the dark of the mountain pass, something unseen watched with pleasure as the first cracks began to form. Chapter 3. The Shattering of the Obsidian Sun. The fires burned low in the mountain pass. Vortigan's body lay beneath a heavy shroud of furs and chainmail, surrounded by a circle of blackened spears. Frost had already begun to form on his beard and lashes. Blood still crusted in the seams of his armor, frozen in jagged lines across his cuirass. No pyre had been lit. The dead, it seemed, no longer received ceremony. Around the corpse, silence reigned. But beyond the ring of stone and ice, voices rose like a storm. Harsh, bitter, splintered. The surviving command staff of the Legion of the Obsidian Sun had convened in a crumbling ruin atop a nearby outcrop. an ancient dwarfen watchtower long since gutted by time and lightning. There, beneath a flapping canopy of canvas and steel, the Legion began to tear itself apart. "The men need direction," Halbrecht snarled, pacing the room like a wolf in a butcher's den. "They need order, purpose, leadership, not grief, not this wallowing." "You speak of leadership," Grendel growled, "yet you couldn't even keep your sword in its sheath before Vortigern's blood had cooled. You sniff at his throne like a jackal." The room darkened as Magister Krell entered from the shadows. Her violet robes trailed mist behind her, the winds of death whispering in her wake. "Grendel speaks truth," she said. "The corpse is still warm, and already your teeth are out." Lieutenant Halbrecht squared his shoulders. He had discarded his sash, donned a wolf-pelt cloak, and polished his breastplate until it gleamed. The youngest faces in the room stood at his back, those loyal to the promise of reform, of a younger, brighter future. "The reformers. You would have us return home, Grendel," Halbrecht sneered. "Tail between our legs? No. Vortigern led us well, but he led us into stagnation. We are more than what he left us. This is an opportunity. Sigmar opens a path." "That wasn't Sigmar's will," came a voice like a church bell tolling in a tomb. The crowd parted as Father Solm entered, gaunt, pale, sunken-eyed, his robes of iron-threaded cloth dragging behind him like a funeral train. His followers, bare-headed zealots clad in mail and bearing flails etched with scripture, fanned out behind him, muttering litanies under their breath. "You call it stagnation," Solm intoned, "but I see sin. Vortigern was struck down during a rite to Sigmar, a holy rite. You want to know the truth?" His eyes gleamed with feverish light. "This was not chaos. This was not Altdorf. This was punishment." Grendel's hand moved slowly to the hilt of his sword. "You tread on a grave with that tongue, priest." Solm did not flinch. "I speak as the prophet of fire. The Iron Faith will burn the rot from the Legion. Those who stood with Vortigern must be judged. Those who harbored corruption must confess." Albrecht scoffed. "Madness. You want a holy inquisition while we bleed in the snow? Look around you. These men are barely alive." "They're alive because Vortigern led them," Grendel snapped. "And now we owe him answers. We return. We root out the truth. Then we bury him with honor." "Return to what?" Halbrecht shouted. "To whispers? Trials? Politics? The nobles in Altdorf would sooner brand us traitors than hear the truth. We move east. We push the campaign forward and carve our own future from the flesh of the damned." A low growl rumbled through the crowd. Steel hissed as blades came half-drawn. Tensions that had festered since Vortigern's fall now boiled over. "You would lead this legion?" Grendel said, stepping toward Halbrecht. You who executed a wounded man in the snow for coughing?" Halbrecht sneered, drawing his blade with a flick. "Better than hiding behind a dead man's shadow." "Enough." Krell's voice shattered the tension like a gong of thunder. Her staff struck the stone, sending out a shockwave of wind and ash. Torches guttered. Spirits shrieked in the darkness. "This is exactly what they wanted," she hissed. "Whoever killed him, be it cultist, noble, daemon, or traitor, wanted this. Division. Chaos. We are playing into their hands." No one spoke. Snow drifted through the broken ceiling like ash from a pyre. Then a voice called from outside. "Campfire on the east ridge." Everyone turned. Another voice echoed through the mountains. "4 ridders, no banners." Steel rang. Helmets snapped on. Orders bellowed. But the damage was already done. By the time dawn broke, 3 camps had formed in the hollow. Grendel's loyalists. Wary, disciplined, haunted. They held fast to the memory of Vortigern and demanded answers before action. Albrecht's reformers, hungry, sharp, and ambitious. They looked east toward conquest and opportunity, driven by belief in their own righteousness. The iron faith, fevered, chanting, purging. They saw divine wrath in every shadow and demanded blood for penance. The Obsidian Sun, once a single unbreakable force, was now fractured, its 3 points aimed inward. And somewhere in the blizzard beyond their torches, something laughed. Chapter 4. Ashes of Command. The camp smoldered like a dying beast. Ash drifted on the wind, cook fires were choked down to embers. The hiss of melting snow mingled with the low murmur of hushed arguments and the distant ring of hammer on steel. Tents had been shifted apart, not for comfort but for separation. 3 groups now occupied the ruins of the hollow like wary predators in a thinning forest. Grendel's loyalists guarded the western slope, grim and silent, huddled close around the shattered banner of the Obsidian Sun. Their fires were low, their patrols doubled. Trust was gone. The memory of Vortigan's voice, his calm, his certainty, now echoed like a ghost none dared speak of. To the south, Albrecht's reformers had raised tents in a disciplined grid, perfectly spaced and draped in crimson banners sewn hastily from scavenged cloth and officers' cloaks. Their nights were lit by torchlight and speeches, Albrecht's voice rising above the cold, filled with promises and prophecy. Ambition radiated from his camp like heat from a forge. Soldiers listened, some curious, others enthralled. At the highest ridge, where the rock jutted like a broken fang, the iron faith burned continuously. Father Psalm and his zealots had raised a crude chapel of bone and steel, with chains strung between altar posts bearing the flayed remains of animals and perhaps 1 or 2 men. They sang in low tones, guttural hymns that made the skin crawl. Every night they lit another pyre and screamed prayers into the dark. Magister Talia Krell moved between them all, a shadow. She slept little, ate less. Her eyes were sunken hollows in her pale face, and the staff she carried seemed to bleed frost into the air around her. The winds of death no longer whispered, they screamed. On the 3rd night, she stood before all 3 faction leaders in the shattered dwarfen watchtower, her words dragging like iron chains. "The winds have turned against us," she said, voice flat as stone. "They twist and scream through the veil like blades in water. Whatever balance we once held, it is gone." Grendel frowned, arms crossed, his armor dented and unpolished. "Warp taint from the assassination?" "No," she said. "Older? Deeper? Something watches. Not a daemon, not a beast, something ancient." Albrecht scoffed from across the room, sipping watered wine beside 2 of his lieutenants. "We're surrounded by fanatics and necromancers. Of course the wind howls." "Mock me again," Krell said coldly, "and I will teach you how it feels when your own blood turns against you." Albrecht stood, slowly. The tension surged. Grendel stepped between them, hand resting on the pommel of his blade. "Enough. We're barely holding the Legion together. Save your duels for later." Krell's eyes flicked between them. Then she turned to the stone table at the center of the room and unrolled a cracked animal hide, etched with new ink. No one spoke. The hide was covered in runes, jagged, spidery symbols unlike anything from the Empire, the North, or even the ruinous texts of chaos. Carved into the bark of trees, found etched in blood on stones, painted in soot on the inside of soldiers' tents. No one claimed them. No one saw who made them. But they kept appearing. "They shift positions nightly," Krell said. "I mapped them. They move in spirals, spirals that grow wider." Psalm entered then, barefoot, soaked in smoke and blood, his robe stiff with dried scripture ink. "You speak of signs," he said, voice like cracking ice, "but fail to see the truth in them. Sigmar is watching, judging. "Sigmar," Krell said, almost laughing, "these are no holy symbols, priest. These runes are older than the gods." Solm's followers muttered. One raised a flail and began to weep. "It doesn't matter who's watching," Grendel cut in, voice gravel rough. "It only matters what happens if we don't act. Our men are cracking. One of my sentries shot his own commander yesterday. Thought he was a daemon. Thought his eyes were wrong." "They were," Krell said quietly. "I saw the corpse. The man's pupils were vertical slits, like a lizard, or a demon host." The silence after that was suffocating. Outside, the blizzard broke for a moment, and a scream echoed through the trees, human, distant, short. Everyone reached for steel. An hour later, Grendel, Krell, and a dozen soldiers found the corpse hanging from a pine. Stripped, limbs twisted into unnatural angles, skin flensed in precise strips, runes carved across the torso, still weeping black resin. The eyes had been removed and replaced with animal teeth. Around the body, the snow had been pressed into hoofprints, too large for a horse, too deep for anything natural. And all around the tree, birds watched, silent, unblinking. Rows of them, dozens. Crows, ravens, a snowy owl, even a sparrow, every one of them staring. "They're not birds," Krell whispered. "Not anymore." She turned and faced the woods, her voice barely above a breath. "We're being measured?" Back in camp, Grendel ordered the men to double the watch. Halbrecht ordered new recruitment drills and punished any deserters with flogging. Solm built another pyre. But something had already changed. The ground beneath the Obsidian Sun was no longer just stone and ice. It was a wound. And whatever had opened it was still watching, waiting, amused. Chapter 5. Echoes in the Mist. They crossed into Sylvania, under a sky that bled. The trees were the first to change. Gone were the towering pines and frostbitten birch of the World's Edge passes. Here the forest was tight, knotted, decaying. Its canopy swallowed light, and the air beneath was damp with a stink of fungus, iron, and rot. Gnarled oaks stretched like twisted claws overhead, their bark resembling flayed flesh, their roots drinking from the bones of the dead. Mist choked the path ahead and behind, curling around the marching columns like a serpent, swallowing footsteps before they fell silent. Grendel marched at the front, face a mask of tension. His eyes scanned the tree line constantly. Halbrecht's reformers took up the rear, spears low, voices hushed. No songs, no chants. Even Father Solm's zealots whispered only fragments of scripture now, uncertain, voices brittle as cracked glass. They all felt it. Sylvania was not a land. It was a memory of something that should have died long ago. Krell rode close to the center, her skeletal steed leaving no hoofprints. The winds of death were stronger here, thick like syrup. They coiled around her like vines. Sometimes she shuddered. Other times she smiled at things no one else could see. "Do not sleep," she told the captains that night. "Not here. Not even in shifts. The dead do not knock." They camped in the ruins of an old watchtower, its stone blackened by centuries of rain and blood. At midnight, the screams began. The first was a scout. He vanished without a sound. The second was found at dawn, strung from a tree, skin peeled back from his face to resemble a grinning skull. His eyes had been gouged out. His mouth was stuffed with crow's feathers. By morning, 20 more were missing. Halbrecht demanded answers. Krell gave none. Solm declared it divine judgment. Grendel ordered the men to keep moving. And so they marched, deeper into the woods, deeper into the fog. But something followed them. It began as a whisper on the wind, then footsteps in the dark, too slow, too heavy to be mortal. Eyes blinked from the trees, pale, hollow, hungry. On the third night, Alric Grendel saw the shade. He had separated from the main force, patrolling alone along the western ridge, when the mist parted like a curtain, the trees bent away, the wind stopped. And there it stood, Vortigan. His armor was rusted, his face pale and drawn, blood still streaked his throat, and his eyes were vacant pits, no iris, no soul, just emptiness, a void staring through time. "Grendel," the thing said, not with lips, but with breath, a whisper that crawled into his ears like worms. He froze, his sword half drawn, breath held. "You left me," the shade said. "You watched me fall. You let the boy rise." Grendel's mouth went dry. "You're not him." "I was," the shade answered. "I was everything you needed, everything they feared. You let them tear me apart." "What do you want?" Grendel whispered. The thing didn't answer with words. It only raised a hand, its gauntlet fused to the bone, and pointed behind him. Grendel turned. The forest was moving. Figures shuffled from the mist, not charging, not howling, but moving in perfect silence. Their armor bore the mark of Vortigan's fallen. Some were familiar. He recognized Sergeant Fald, his face peeled clean, eyes glowing faint blue. Old Captain Ruis, now with half a jaw and a belly full of black ichor. They marched in perfect formation. Undead, the remnants of the Legion, those left behind in the north, killed in battle, their flesh now puppeted by something older than death. They came with discipline, they came with tactics, they came as soldiers, not mindless beasts. Grendel ran. He returned to camp out of breath, eyes wild, demanding that torches be lit, weapons drawn, and the perimeter reinforced. "They're coming," he growled. "Vortigan's fallen. The dead march." That night they attacked. From the trees, from the fog. Silent as smoke, and just as deadly. It was not a battle, it was a massacre in slow motion. One by one, soldiers were dragged into the dark. Spears shattered against rusted shields, swords broke on bone. The undead fought in formation, responding to orders only they could hear, tactics from another life. The Iron Faith tried to exorcise them. Their flames did little. Psalm himself held a burning censer high, screaming Sigmar's name, until a gauntlet crushed his jaw sideways and pulled him into the earth. His scream stopped quickly. Albrecht fought like a madman. He slew 5, maybe more, but his confidence cracked when one of them saluted him before attacking. Krell held the line only by calling forth a circle of the dead, wraiths of old Empire heroes pulled from their rest to counter the revenants. The clash of spirit on spirit turned the air to glass. By dawn, the field was soaked with gore. The dead retreated, not defeated, only finished. For now. The survivors gathered among the broken wagons and burning tents, too tired to speak, too stunned to weep. Grendel stood beside a corpse missing its head, his knuckles white on the pommel of his sword. "They remember," he whispered. "They remember who they were, and they remember us." Krell looked to the east. "Not revelants," she said, "not raised by necromancy. Something older, something worse. These are echoes. The land remembers, the blood, the betrayal. It feeds on it." Albrecht looked to the trees, and for the first time he did not speak. The Legion marched again that day, but slower, less sure. The banner of the Obsidian Sun was torn completely, and no one moved to repair it. Sylvania had judged them, and it had found them wanting. Chapter 6. The Crownless Path. The declaration came with a sword in one hand and a proclamation in the other. At dawn, Corwin Hallbrick stood atop a ruined cart draped in crimson cloth. surrounded by his personal retinue, men younger, hungrier, more loyal to his name than the Legion's legacy. Behind him fluttered the newly sewn banner of a golden crown over a field of red. Above it, smoke from last night's fires drifted lazily, carrying the scent of burned flesh. "My brothers," Halbreth called out, his voice clean and sharp as the frost. "We stand in chaos, leaderless, scattered, betrayed by hesitation and cowardice. But no more." He drew his blade, gleaming, unblooded this day. "In the name of Sigmar, of the Imperial throne, and for the salvation of the Empire's eastern walls, I declare myself High Marshal of the Obsidian Sun. From this day forward, our Legion is reborn." A silence spread like rot. Then, applause from his own. Chants, cries of, "Marshal Halbrecht!" Soldiers raised weapons, others hesitated. And from the western line of the camp, Captain Alric Grendel stood watching, teeth clenched, arms crossed. Armor still smeared with dried black ichor from their brush with the dead, his expression was iron. "You dare claim the title Vortigan never yielded?" he growled. "You call yourself marshal, but you command only the young and the desperate. This is not order. This is ambition dressed in ceremony." Albric's face remained serene, but his eyes gleamed. "And you, Grendel, who shelter deserters and consort with that grave whore of a magister, you are declared traitor to the new Legion. Stand down or be put down." The air snapped taut. Steel rasped from scabbards. The Legion fractured in real time. Grendel turned to his captains. "We move west," he said quietly. "We take the old trails, deeper into the forest, away from this madness." "But, sir," one lieutenant began. Grendel's gaze silenced him. "There is no chain of command here anymore. Only thrones carved from corpses." Within hours the Loyalists were gone, slipping into the tangled woods, leaving behind smoldering embers and broken shields. Some tried to follow, but were cut down by Halbrecht's horsemen before they reached the tree line. Halbrecht watched from his perch, eyes fixed on the trees. Let the forest swallow him. He will choke on its ghost soon enough. But the forest had already choked on worse. That night, the first executions began. Father Psalm, pale and shaking with righteous fury, summoned the zealots of the Iron Faith into Halbrecht's camp. At first they whispered warnings. Then they whispered names. Heresy, necromancy, worship of foreign gods, collaboration with chaos. Halbrecht watched it unfold, silent. The first man, a scout who had once shared bread with a chaos prisoner for information, was dragged from his tent and flayed in front of the men, his skin nailed to a tree where it blew in the wind like a flag of warning. The second was a quartermaster accused of hoarding relics. His tongue was removed, then his fingers, then his eyes. The third was a boy, no older than 16. He'd cried out in sleep, muttered something about the black sun rising. That was all. They found his corpse swinging above the latrine pit, entrails twisted into the shape of a comet. Psalm claimed Sigmar guided each choice. Halbrecht gave no orders to stop him. The wild woods of the Dreadwald, Grendel's Loyalists built crude shelters of bone and timber, hiding beneath gnarled roots and the rotting eaves of ancient trees. Mist clung to the ground like wet cloth. They did not light fires. They spoke in low tones. They slept in armor. The forest whispered to them. Sometimes it screamed. Grendel remained silent most days. When he did speak, it was to bark orders, or to ask if the watchers in the mist had returned. The ghost of Vortigan had not reappeared. But they all felt it. Talia Krell, gaunt and hollow-eyed, walked the camp's perimeter nightly. The winds here were worse, not chaotic but wrong, like veins pumping something that was not blood. "These woods remember," she whispered to Grendel one evening. "They know what we are, and they don't care." You sound like Solm, Grendel muttered. No, she said. Solm believes we are judged by gods. I believe we are judged by the dead. Back in Halbrecht's camp, banners snapped in the cold wind, but the faces beneath them were tired, ragged, blood-stained. The executions had not ended, they had evolved. Now it was those who spoke too kindly of the past, those who hesitated to salute, those who prayed in silence rather than join the faith's nightly bonfires. Father Solm stood in front of the flames, robes drenched in soot and scripture blood, his sermons devolving into screams. "We are iron," he roared. "Iron must be tempered, in fire, in pain, in blood." Behind him, rows of prisoners were bound to stakes. They burned. Some cried, others sang. One man laughed, long and loud, until his lungs collapsed. Solm smiled at that, and Halbrecht watched it all, eyes distant, hands clasped behind his back, unmoving. The Obsidian Sun was now two blades, forged from the same steel, turned against each other. No chaos warband had ever broken them. But ambition, zeal, and doubt had. The war within the Legion had begun, and it was worse than any war they had ever fought. Because this time they knew the faces of the men they would have to kill. Chapter 7. Sigmar's Forsaken. The chapel stood like a broken tooth among the withered trees of the Dreadwald. Its stone walls, once whitewashed and etched with celestial runes, were now streaked with blood, soot, and strange purple sigils that pulsed faintly in the moonlight. Vines had burst through the stained-glass windows, twisting across the warped iron of the sigil of Sigmar, fracturing it into something crooked and unfamiliar. The great hammer of the god was now inverted, shattered at the haft. This had once been a sanctum of light. Now it was little more than a mausoleum for faith. Magister Talia Krell approached it in silence, her skeletal steed picking its way through the grave-choked mud. The air shimmered around her, the winds of death rippling with unnatural strength. She felt them crawl across her skin, hungry and eager. Inside the chapel, the air was cold as the grave, and something whispered. She stepped inside. Her staff glowed faintly, its purple light casting long shadows across the broken pews and scorched altar. Bones littered the floor, many too small to belong to soldiers. Runes had been carved into every surface, crude, layered, chaotic, some fresh, others ancient. Blood glistened in the cracks, still wet in places, though no living thing remained. She moved past the altar, deeper into the crypts below. The stairs were slick, the darkness absolute. Only the pulse of her staff gave any shape to the stone walls, now swollen with veins of warp taint, living, mutating stone. Her breath frosted in the air. At the bottom, behind rusted bars torn open like paper, she found the library. It had been hidden beneath floor stones bearing Sigmar's seal, beneath chains and layers of holy wards. She shattered them with whispered curses, each one peeling back a piece of her soul, each one drawing her closer to the line Vortigan had once warned her never to cross. The tomes within were bound in flayed flesh, etched with blood. They whispered as she approached, some laughing, some sobbing, one gasping the name of a forgotten god with each turn of a page. She read for hours. She read of a demon that had no true name, only titles. The architect of shattered oaths, the ever-severed eye, the prince of labyrinths, a creature of Tzeentch, the changer of ways, a power that moved through thought, betrayal, and prophecy like rot in water. The texts told of a man, a mortal soul of immense will and growing influence, who had, unknowingly, become a nexus of fate, a living fulcrum around which the East might stand or fall. The demon had seen him. It had whispered to his allies, had twisted their dreams. infiltrated his command, guided the dagger. Vortigan was not killed by political ambition. He was hunted, marked, sacrificed, and his soul? Stolen, not sent to Mor's garden, not embraced by Sigmar's light, but dragged, chained and screaming, into a prison within the warp. There it would be devoured slowly, turned into a keystone in the demon's design, a plan centuries in the making. She fell to her knees, bile rising in her throat. Her fingers bled from turning the pages, her vision blurred with tears she hadn't felt in decades. And yet, she read on, because if this was true, if Vortigan's soul was a linchpin in some unfathomable cosmic manipulation, then everything they did now, every faction, every death, was merely fuel. And worse, they were already trapped in its web. She returned to the surface at dawn, shaking. In her tent, she began her work. No more chants of the Amethyst College. No more regulated rituals. Now she practiced true necromancy, not to raise corpses, but to see beyond the veil, to call Vortigan's spirit back, to touch the scar where his soul had been torn away. The first time she killed a raven, slit its throat, watched its eyes roll white. The second time, a soldier's corpse, one of Halbrecht's, taken from a skirmish, was nailed to the stone, his entrails arranged in runes. She whispered the names of old gods and opened a vein into the fire. The body screamed, not in pain, but in knowledge. It screamed words that made her ears bleed. It spoke of wheels within wheels, of towers falling before they rose, of Grendel burying a blade in Halbrecht's spine, of Solm burning, of her hands becoming talons. She wept. Then she drew more circles, sacrificed more birds, fed more corpses into the mist. She needed more, needed to reach him, to find Vortigan, to rip him back from the warp. But every attempt brought more, things, spirits, not his. Twisted ghosts, wraiths made of masks and knives. One bore her own face, one wept until its jaw fell off. One simply stood and repeated, "You open the door," again and again until it dissolved. She could feel her sanity bending, but she didn't stop. Because if Vortigan's death was not an end, but the first note of a symphony of betrayal, then she was the only one who could still hear the tune. In Halbrecht's camp, soldiers had begun to vanish again. No patrols returned from near the old chapel. One man came back mad, eyes rolled back, tongue chewed off. Another tried to crucify himself with nails made of bone. The others started calling the place Sigmar's Fall. They did not go near it. But Krell remained, in her dark sanctum, her skin cracked with magic, her breath foul with ash, her mind unraveling. She spoke less, ate nothing, slept with her eyes open. She was no longer a wizard. She was a medium, a vessel, a bone-carved blade scraping the veil. And something with 1,000 faces, was whispering to her now. "Closer, little mage, closer. The answer waits beneath your skin." Chapter 8. The Blood Accord. The pact was sealed in blood, ash, and flame. Beneath the cracked skull of a toppled Sigmarite statue, Corwin Halbrecht knelt, barehanded, before a flame-blackened altar constructed from the bones of traitors and heretics, each vertebra used as a step, each rib cracked to cradle fire. Across from him stood Father Psalm, shrouded in his smoke-drenched robes, a crown of rusted nails hammered into his bald scalp. His breath came in wet, ragged exhalations. His hands, long and clawed from age and disease, trembled, not with age, but with holy fervor. The iron faith sang in low, guttural tones behind him, 100 voices repeating a single word. Between them, a sacrificial bowl of silver, filled with Halbrecht's blood, freshly drawn, still steaming in the chill, His hand trembled as he gripped the ritual blade, not from fear, but from something worse. Certainty. "We are agreed," Solm intoned, each word rasping through his half-rotted throat. "You will raise the banner of the crowned flame. You will burn the heretics from your ranks, and in return I will give you obedience." Albrecht nodded. "No longer shall we squabble like children," he said. "The Legion will be whole again, righteous, purified." "And by whose law?" Solm whispered, a smile splitting the cracked leather of his lips. "Sigmor's," Halberhawk lied. "The purge begins." That night, a new decree was nailed to every remaining wall, tent post, and tree trunk in Halberg's camp. The blood accord of flame and crown. All soldiers of the Obsidian Sun shall now serve under the divine mandate of High Marshal Halbrecht and Reverend Solm. Those who reject the accord shall be branded heretic and given to the flame. There were no trials, no confessions, only names, spoken in whispers. The first to die was Sergeant Holland, who had once questioned Solm's nightly sermons. Dragged from his tent by 4 zealots, he was stripped, painted in oil, and burned alive on a wagon wheel while hymns rang out from throats coated in soot and madness. He screamed for 8 minutes before his lungs collapsed. The second was a cook, an old Kislevite woman with no tongue, who had once boiled a stew too close to Krell's sanctum. Solm declared her soul infected by necromantic residue. Her head was crushed beneath a stone bearing Sigmar's hammer. The third was a child, a drummer boy from the Southern Company. No one knew who accused him. He was too small for the flames. They simply threw him into a pit and buried him alive while prayers were sung. By the third day, the camp stank of smoke, iron, and piss. Halbrecht's men stopped looking each other in the eye. They wrapped their faces in cloth, not from the cold, but from the stench of charred flesh. Some began carving Sigmarite runes into their own skin to avoid suspicion. The idealism of reform, the bright fire that Halbrecht had once used to rally the weary and disillusioned, had burned out. Now only fear remained. The Council of Flame. Halbrecht stood before the black altar of the Accord, eyes hollow, hands wrapped in fresh bandages. He no longer wore polish or livery. His armor was blackened from ash, pitted with blood. His once boyish face had become gaunt, jaw set in a constant grind of fury. The old Legion was flawed, he told his remaining officers. Soft, compromised. Vortigan made us strong, yes, but blind. Grendel would drag us back to weakness, to corruption. That cannot stand. Solm watched, smiling as his flock knelt behind him, chanting quietly. "Grendel is no longer a captain," Halbrecht continued. "He is a disease, and we are the cure." He unrolled a parchment. It was a list of names. Every known loyalist hiding in the Western Wood, every suspected sympathizer, every scout who had been seen speaking with Grendel's retreating officers. The next dawn, Halbrecht declared, "We burn the forest." Symbolism, the ash of idealism. The morning came like a second night, shrouded in fog and the bitter stink of pitch. Halbrecht's forces, flanked by Solm's zealots, approached the edge of the forest with torches held high. Crude flame-casters, repurposed alchemical throwers were primed. One by one, the trees were lit from root to crown, the flames roaring with unnatural hunger. Birds exploded from the canopy, ash fell like snow, the woods screamed. But what emerged was not Grendel. The forest fought back. Shadows darted through the flame, arrows loosed from behind burning trunks, catching Halbrecht's men in the neck, in the gut, in the eyes. Screams echoed as the underbrush came alive with pit traps, spring-loaded blades and corpses reanimated by old rites. Grendel's men were not soldiers anymore. They were survivors, wolves in the smoke. They killed without war cries, fought without honor, and when the fire began to consume their own, They vanished deeper into the trees, leaving Halbricht's purge in chaos. Halbricht stood, watching the forest burn. His lips curled, not in triumph, but in hate. Pure, blinding. "This is mercy," he whispered. "Let it all burn." By nightfall, 3 more villages near the western wood were razed, not by chaos, not by the undead, but by Sigmar's own sons, turned inward, devouring their own. In the heart of the camp, Father Solm offered a new prayer. He thanked the flame. He praised the blade, and he smiled when the smoke turned blue. Chapter 9. War Without End. Castle Eisenhold had not seen life in 2 centuries. Its walls, cracked and crawling with ivy, loomed like the ribs of a dead god, silhouetted against a sky bruised purple and black. Its towers stood jagged and broken, watching the blood-soaked valley below with empty, glassless eyes. Beneath its crumbling ramparts, the earth was soft with centuries of decay, perfect ground for dying. And die they did. The 2 broken halves of the Obsidian Sun clashed like thunder against stone. On one side, Grendel's loyalists, hardened by forest warfare and starvation, armored in patchwork steel, their banner nothing more than a torn scrap of black cloth soaked in blood. On the other, Halbricht's reformed legion. Fanatics and zealots in burned livery, their crimson tabards soaked in pitch and scripture, led by officers with clean blades and wild eyes. Between them the field was churned into a mire of corpses, mud and blood, ankle-deep and boiling in the morning light. The charge. The Loyalists struck first. Grendel himself led the vanguard, his greatsword a cleaving arc of steel and fury. He moved like a machine of war, silent, efficient, drowning in the screams of dying men. Behind him a wave of battered but unbroken warriors crashed into Halbricht's front lines, shields shattering, maces rising and falling with bone-crunching finality. Spears broke, banners fell, blood soaked into the frost. Halbricht's men responded with discipline. Whistles cut through the chaos, and ranks reformed instantly, blades glinting. Solm's zealots followed close behind, their hammers dripping with rot, chanting hymns as they smashed into the Loyalist flank like a tide of fire. One of them, barefoot, eyes gone, mouth sewn shut, grabbed a Loyalist sergeant by the throat and bit through his windpipe. Another crushed a kneeling woman's skull with a prayer-inscribed flail. Behind the melee, Halbricht watched from horseback, his armor now blackened and cruel, eyes hidden behind a visored helm. He raised his sword once, and fire rained down from trebuchets atop Eisenhold's western wall, barrels of burning pitch and scrap metal crashing into Grendel's rear lines with devastating force. The screams that followed were not human. Not anymore. Treachery. In the heart of the chaos, Captain Dern Falric, one of Grendel's oldest veterans, turned. Without warning, he raised his axe and buried it in the spine of his own lieutenant, severing the man's body from life in one wet, awful stroke. Then he shouted, "The sun rises for the strong." Half his company turned with him, dozens of exhausted, hungry warriors, promised food, glory, and forgiveness by Halbricht's agents. They surged into Grendel's right flank, gutting comrades, bellowing praises to a new dawn. The line buckled. Grendel saw the betrayal unfold through blood and smoke. He charged Falric himself, crashing into the man with a roar and a strike that nearly severed his torso. Falric collapsed in 2 shrieking pieces. But the damage was done. The Loyalists began to fracture. The fall of Eisenhold. Krell stood atop the broken chapel spire of Eisenhold, robes billowing, arms raised in supplication. Her face was streaked with ash and blood, her eyes black with the winds of death. Around her, a circle of skulls glowed with faint violet light. "I bind you to war," she hissed into the veil. The bones answered. Corpses, hundreds, rose from the field. broken, missing limbs, skulls split, flesh sloughing from rot. They moved like puppets in a storm, driven by Krell's rage. They did not distinguish friend from foe. They slaughtered indiscriminately. Grendel tried to stop her. "You'll kill us all." She looked down at him from the tower, her mouth dripping blood. "We're already dead." Moments later, a bolt of divine flame struck the spire. Father Sulm, wielding a censer of molten gold, had called down a ritual consecration. The spire exploded. Krell's body was flung into the air like a burning rag doll. She vanished into smoke and rubble. The dead fell again. The wound. Grendel was pulled from the fray by two of his last remaining officers. Blood poured from a wound in his side. A hooked glaive had pierced beneath his ribs during the chaos. His armor was crushed, his face pale, his breaths shallow. "We have to retreat," someone screamed. He tried to rise. Couldn't. His eyes turned to Eisenholt, once a ruin, now a funeral pyre, flames crawling up its towers like fingers grasping for heaven. Screams still echoed within. Someone was burning alive in the chapel. Maybe a dozen someones. Retreat. The Loyalists fled west, into the forests, dragging their wounded, abandoning the dead. There was no order, no honor, only survival. Behind them, Halbrecht's men raised their own banner over the blackened ramparts, a crowned flame on a crimson field. "Victory," Halbrecht whispered, watching from the battlements. But even he didn't believe it, because the field below was a graveyard, and the victory was hollow. Because the only thing the Obsidian Sun had conquered was itself. Chapter 10. The Emperor's Silence. The ashes of Eisenholt still hung in the air like a curse when the envoy arrived. He came alone. No banner, no retinue, no trumpets, just a pale gray horse, a black leather satchel, and a silver cloak stitched with the double-headed eagle of Altor, tarnished, frayed, and speckled with blood. The riders who first saw him on the eastern approach claimed the forest itself had grown quiet in his wake. No birds, no wind, just silence and hooves over broken earth. By the time he reached the shattered gates of Castle Eisenhold, the crows were already gathering again. A letter from the Sun King. High Marshal Corwin Halbrecht stood on the ramparts as the envoy dismounted, flanked by two Iron Faith guards who didn't hide their unease. One clutched his flail too tightly. The other whispered prayers beneath his breath, sweat pooling at his collar. The envoy met Halbrecht with a bow. His face was smooth, too smooth, free of scars, lines, or color. His eyes were a pale silver, unblinking. His voice was warm, melodic, and utterly empty. "By order of the Golden Throne," he said, withdrawing a scroll sealed in blood-red wax, "the Emperor Karl Franz of the Reikland, Protector of the Empire, hereby proclaims the Legion of the Obsidian Sun roll." The words struck like hammers. The wind seemed to howl in that moment. Halbrecht stepped forward, jaw clenched. "On what grounds?" The envoy tilted his head just slightly, too fluidly. "You have abandoned your posts. You have turned your blades inward. You have allowed forbidden sorceries to fester under your command." He smiled. "The Obsidian Sun is no longer of the Empire." He unrolled the parchment. "Effective immediately. All Imperial support is hereby withdrawn. No provisions, reinforcements, or recognition shall be extended to any member of the Legion. Any survivors who return to Altdorf will be tried under martial law. The sun is extinguished." A silence deeper than death settled over the ruins. "Return to Altdorf," Halbrecht said, his voice low, shaking. "And tell the Emperor he has betrayed his own." "I will not return," the envoy replied, tucking the scroll away. "My duty is to watch." Paranoia unchained. That night rumors bloomed like plague sores. The envoy never eats. He doesn't blink. He doesn't cast a shadow. He's too perfect. A veteran swore he saw the man's fingers bend backwards while clasping his hands. Another claimed the envoy whispered in 10 voices while he slept. Father Psalm's zealots began marking their tents with runes of warding. Krell's name was invoked in curses and prayers alike. Some believed he was an imperial assassin. Others believed worse. A changeling, a demon of Tzeentch, sent to whisper dissent, fracture loyalty, guide the fall. Halbrecht laughed at first, a hollow, humorless sound. But that night he ordered the envoy's tent to be moved outside the walls, and guards posted, and no fire within 20 feet of it. Krell's warning. Magister Krell emerged from the ruins after days of silence. Her skin was paler now, ashen, almost translucent. The veins around her eyes pulsed with faint purple light. She smelled of death and iron. She approached Halbrecht without ceremony. "That thing is not a man." Halbrecht didn't look up. He sat on the edge of the battlements, watching the last of the loyalist prisoners being executed by fire below. "You believe he's a daemon?" he asked, voice distant. "I believe he is worse," she replied. "He is confirmation." "Of what?" "That we are alone." She turned, the shadows stretching unnaturally behind her. Fractures deepen. With no supplies, no command, and no cause, the Legion began to rot. Rations dwindled, water turned brackish, sickness bloomed in the camp, bloody coughs, wasting fevers, madness. One man stabbed himself in the face with a spoon. Another set his tent alight and sat inside it, singing lullabies. The soldiers who remained began forming cults of their own, tiny cabals, worshipping whatever would give them warmth, purpose, or visions. Some followed Krell. Some whispered prayers to a new god that bled from their dreams. Solm's sermons became more violent, more ecstatic. He declared that the Emperor was a false light, that only Sigmar's original wrath remained pure. He prophesied that the skies would open and wash the unfaithful away in rivers of eyes and wings. His followers lapped blood from the altar stone and called it holy. The envoy watches. Through it all, the envoy remained. He stood on the eastern ridge each morning, watching the ruins, arms folded. Always calm, always silent. One morning a messenger approached him with a question. The envoy turned his head and spoke 5 words. The man's skull imploded in a quiet crunch, like rotting fruit beneath a boot. The body was buried without rites. After that, no one spoke to the envoy. Not even Solm. The Emperor's silence. The final message came not by scroll, but by sky. A lone imperial griffin passed overhead at dusk, its rider bearing the full regalia of the celestial college. It circled once, twice, then turned and flew west. No aid, no banners, no hope. And then the snow began to fall again, thick, heavy flakes the color of bone. The ground swallowed the blood. The screams dulled. The sun did not rise. Next morning, not even a red one, only the wind, only silence, only the watching thing on the hill. Chapter 11. The Demon's Mask. The wind was no longer wind. It howled, yes, but not in the way nature howls. It spoke. It breathed. It mimicked. It screamed in voices you knew. Mothers, brothers, lovers, yourself. And high above the shattered remnants of Castle Eisenhold, the sky had turned wrong. The stars spun, the clouds pulsed like veins, and in the center of the sky hung a tear, a rift, too faint for mortal eyes, but visible to those who dealt in death and shadow. Magister Talia Krell stood at the edge of her warded sanctum, her breath frosting in the air, her fingers black to the wrist from ritual scarring, and her eyes burning. She had confirmed it. She had seen it. The dagger that had ended Vortigan's life, the warped, shimmering blade with its veins of glass and oil, had not been forged by man, not by chaos cultist, not even by mortal hand. It was crafted in the warp, not simply tainted, not corrupted over time, born from it, shaped by thought, dream, desire. She had peeled back its layers with ritual, carving truth from illusion with strips of her own flesh and the entrails of a still-living deer. She had held the blade to her throat and listened to it whisper, and it had whispered his name. Archelath the Prismide, Demon Prince of Tzeentch, the architect of masks. This was no assassination of opportunity. It had been ordained. Vortigan was a threat to Tzeentch's design. His iron resolve and instinct for unity had made him a break in the weave. So a thread had been pulled. Whispers had been sent, dreams poisoned, alliances cracked. And somewhere in the dark, a mask had been placed on a soul too eager to wear it. The ring of the whispering eye. Krell stood before a scrying mirror crafted from obsidian and bone, her breath rattling as she fed it a drop of her own blood, mixed with the ashes of a heretic. The mirror trembled. It showed Halbrecht pacing his war chamber, the shadows long, the light flickering unnaturally. His voice was low. He spoke to no one, or so it seemed. And then she saw it. On his right hand, just beneath the seam of his gauntlet, gleamed a ring. Black metal, twisted into an Ouroboros of flame and feather, with a single eye carved into the stone. The iris pulsed faintly. It blinked once. She recoiled. The ring was a gift, an artifact bound to Archelath. It did not dominate its wearer. It seduced. It encouraged. It fed on buried longing, on hidden hunger. Every dream Halbrecht had of glory, of rulership, of ascendancy, the ring whispered, "You deserve more. They do not see you. You were meant to lead, not kneel." He didn't know it was cursed. That was the most dangerous part. He thought it was his idea. The brewing storm. The sky cracked like glass. Warp lightning forked across the heavens, blues and purples, colors not seen by sane men. Snow fell, but when it struck the ground it hissed and boiled, melting into puddles of viscous, glowing fluid. Birds burst in mid-air. Wolves were found with hands instead of paws, their jaws filled with human teeth. Krell's wards shivered, then failed. In the eastern camp, a man's mouth vanished. One moment he was speaking, the next just blank skin where lips once were. He suffocated before he could scream. Another soldier vomited up his own shadow, which clawed its way free and ran shrieking into the trees. Psalm claimed it was judgment. Halbrecht blamed Krell. Krell knew the truth. The storm was coming. A warp storm born of Vortigan's murder, fed by betrayal, stoked by demonic glee, and now drawn to the ring on Halbrecht's hand like iron to lodestone. The veil was thin here. Too thin. The warning. Krell entered Halbrecht's chamber unannounced. His guards drew weapons. She ignored them. They stepped back, afraid. Some swore her eyes were black pits that leaked mist. One saw worms writhing beneath her skin. "You're marked," she said. "No ceremony, no veil. You wear a ring that does not belong to you." Halbrecht rose, calm, calculated. "I wear the seal of leadership. It is the brand of a slave." He laughed. "You're mad. All this rot, this talk of daemons and spirits, your necromancy has eaten your mind." She stepped forward. "Take it off?" "No." "Then you are already lost." They stood in silence, the fire crackling. Then Halbrecht spoke, voice low. "The ring is mine. It strengthens me. shows me what is coming. Victory, order, a new dawn. The gods favor me now. Krell whispered, "Which gods?" Halbrecht didn't answer. Krell turned and laughed. A tear in the world. That night the warp storm broke. Lightning struck 3 times in the same place, just outside the walls. The ground split, trees turned to glass, soldiers bled from their ears as the wind howled with 1,000 voices. The rift widened, and from it something stirred. A thing in robes, a mask of 1,000 faces, eyes that were not eyes. It did not enter. It only watched, waited. Chapter 12. Shadow Council. They gathered in the belly of the world, where roots had grown thick and gnarled like veins, and the air tasted of iron and old death. A hollow beneath a collapsed dwarfenhold, hidden deep in the Black Mountains, where the stones still wept from ancient battles. No light from above reached this place, only the flicker of guttering torches, the soft hiss of wet moss, and the murmurs of dying men. Here, surrounded by ruin and ghosts, Captain Ulrich Grendel assembled the last hope of a legion that had long since bled itself to death. The men who answered his summons were not heroes. They were scars given flesh, veterans with missing limbs and haunted eyes, former officers who had watched comrades burned for heresy, a witch hunter who had renounced the Sigmarite order after witnessing Father Salm drink blood from a hollowed jawbone, a Kislevite sellsword who hadn't spoken since Eisenhold, a woman named Surha who'd once commanded 300 and now wore 10 fingers taken from her dead subordinates around her neck, each one polished to a shine. And among them stood Krell, no longer fully woman, no longer fully sane. The winds of death clung to her like a second skin. Where she stepped, the fungus withered and the rats scurried back into bone piles. Her eyes no longer blinked. They called this meeting the Shadow Council. Grendel stood before them, ragged and hollowed by weeks of retreat, wounds that would never heal, and the knowledge that everything they'd believed in had turned to ash. He placed a scroll on the altar, stone at the center of the chamber. "This," he said, voice rough as gravel, "is where the corruption begins." The scroll was a map, ancient and blood-stained. It showed the Black Mountains, but not as they were known. This was a relic from the time before Sigmar, before man, inked in the tongue of the Old Ones and annotated by the dead. At the heart of the mountains was a symbol, a circle with 4 slashes through it, a Wattgate, not one seen in myth or even in battle. This one never fully opened, a scar in the fabric of reality, a potentiality waiting to be widened. It leaked madness, poisoned dreams, drew demons and cults like flies to meat. It was, Grendel explained, the eye through which the architect watched. "It feeds the storm," he said. "It pulled the dagger into Vortigan's chest. It whispers to Halbrecht through his ring. It must be sealed or destroyed." A silence followed. Surha laughed, a low, broken sound. "You want us to attack a rift in reality?" "No," Grendel said. "I want us to bleed on it, so nothing else can come through." "The plan." Krell stepped forward, staff glowing faintly, skulls twitching at her belt. "It is possible," she said. "We won't destroy it, but I can weave a prison. I will need time, protection, and blood. A lot of blood." "How much?" someone asked. Krell didn't blink. "As much as it takes." Grendel looked around. These were not warriors anymore. They were knives, bent, blunted, and now finally pointed in the right direction. "We strike before the storm reaches full strength, before Halbrecht finishes his transformation, before the veil tears wide. And if we fail," the Kislevite rasped, "then we become the last line between man and extinction." Gathering the ashes. The following days were spent in whispered travel. Messengers, veterans thought dead, deserters thought damned. rode by night, hiding from Halbrecht's patrols and the growing warbands that now crawled from the wood. They reached out to every fragment of the Legion that had not yet burned, been corrupted or broken. They gathered 32 warriors. That was all. 32 blades, 32 souls, bound not by orders or banners, but by one shared truth. They had nothing left to lose. They forged weapons from scavenged steel. They blessed their blades in mud and grave ash. Krell etched sigils of protection into their skin with a dead child's bone dipped in warp-blackened ink. One man screamed himself to death during the ritual. No one blinked. Redemption in ruin. The night before the march, Grendel sat alone beside a dwindling flame, sharpening his blade. Krell approached, silent as mist. "You don't plan to survive this," she said. "No." "You think death will make up for it?" "No," he said again, "but maybe it'll mean something." Krell sat beside him, her face unreadable. "I saw Vortigan in the warp," she whispered. "He didn't blame you." Grendel didn't look up. "Doesn't matter." She watched the flame die. Marched to the gate. They moved like phantoms through the black mountains, past crumbling ruins infested with flies and whispering bones, across rivers that flowed in reverse, through valleys where the stars shifted when you blinked. The warp gate lay at the base of a crater of glass, a wound where nothing lived. The rocks wept blood, the trees leaned away from it. Lightning struck the same place again and again, the mouth of the gate a spiraling portal that wasn't open, but wasn't closed either. They could hear it breathing. Krell set the ritual stones. Grendel set the perimeter. And then they waited. For the horde. Because they knew Halbrecht had seen this. Through the ring. Through the eyes of whatever watched him now. He would not let them close the wound. And when the storm finally broke, and fire poured from the sky like rain, Grendel smiled. Because this time they chose the battlefield. And they were ready to bleed. Chapter 13. The Siege of Ironfire. They marched beneath a sky made of bruises. Thunder rolled in unnatural rhythm, 3 beats, then silence. Lightning forked across the heavens in shapes that didn't resemble anything born of nature, wheels within wheels, eyes, wings that bled light. The winds of magic howled through the valleys like wolves on fire. Ahead of them stood Ironfire Bastion, once a proud dwarfen hold, now a monstrosity of warped stone and screaming brass, a fortress reborn in the image of chaos. Where once statues of ancestor kings lined the battlements, there now perched grotesque metal beasts, living gargoyles that hissed steam and twitching flesh. Smoke bled from the upper towers like poisoned breath, and the walls wept blood-red slag, molten iron that pulsed like arteries. At the center stood the great gate, 30 feet tall, sealed with blackened steel and a central eye forged of bronze that blinked once every hour. It had no defenders visible on the walls, because it didn't need them. Inside lived corruption, warped men and beasts, forgotten terrors, a fragment of Tzeentch's will, housed in stone and sorrow. Grendel's coalition stood in the shadow of that obscene citadel, 32 in number, survivors, madmen, and those whose souls had already burned. They had come to make a noise loud enough to draw the devil's attention. The first blow. Grendel raised his broken blade, no longer polished, its edge notched and blackened by a dozen cursed skirmishes, and pointed to the gate. Break it. They moved with savage precision. Bombs fashioned from casks of alchemical fire were rolled forward. Dwarfen breach charges, retrieved from lost vaults, were lashed to the stone. Krell spoke ancient words in the language of bone, and the earth beneath the gate twisted, as if trying to flee its own skin. With a thunderous crack, the wall split. Out poured the defenders of Ironfire. But they were not dwarves, not men, not beasts. They were things that had once been all three. Misshapen bodies of iron-welded flesh, shrieking faces buried in their own stomachs. Blades for hands, smoke for breath. Some floated, limbs twitching as if submerged in unseen waters. Others skittered on spider legs made of rusted chain. Warped constructs, birthed from the dreams of a god who could not dream. Grendel's warriors met them in the gap, and the slaughter began. Iron, fire, and bone. The courtyard became a butcher's theater. A warrior named Beric charged a horned monstrosity and was cleaved in half, his spine erupting like a snapped rope of meat. Serhat cut down 2 creatures before being pulled into a vent by hooked chains. Her screams lasted long enough for the others to know they'd failed her. Krell raised the dead around her. Bones boiled up from the earth, forming spectral spearmen clad in black flame. They skewered one daemon machina through the throat, and it screamed in a child's voice before shattering into rusted fragments. Blood ran like rivers. The stones steamed. The air burned with copper and cordite. Grendel fought at the front, his blade locked with a construct whose face was a mirror, a reflection of his own younger self, pristine, hopeful, sneering. He shattered it with a roar and kept moving. They carved their way through the outer yard. They reached the tower. They planted Sigmarite relics stolen from Solm's chapel into the stone. And then Krell whispered, "It's time." Albrecht marches. From the north Albrecht came, leading hundreds. Reformed legionnaires in crimson, black, Iron Faith zealots chanting and weeping. Chariots pulled by mutated warhorses, brass-armored reavers. Their banners bore the crowned flame, the symbol of Halbrich's ascendancy, stolen from Vortigan's legacy and twisted to Zenith's liking. At his back, a storm boiled. At his side, the envoy, still silent, eyes empty, watching. And on Halbrecht's hand, the ring. It pulsed now, bright, eager. It hummed with the approach of destiny. He saw the smoke over Ironfire and smiled. "He's forcing our hand," he said. "Grendel thinks he'll draw me in, and he's right." The ring whispered. The wind replied. And Halbrecht led his army to crush the last ember of resistance. The gate opens. As the sun died behind warp-scarred clouds, Krell stood in the ruined chapel at Ironfire's core. The altar had long since been defiled, its golden runes replaced with squirming glyphs. Before her was the blade, the dagger that killed Vortigan, recovered in silence, its edge still slick with spectral residue. She placed it at the center of the ritual circle, laid her staff across it, opened her own palm, let her blood drip onto the cursed metal. She began the incantation. The walls trembled. The light bent. Reality folded in on itself, and for one brief moment the warp gate in the crater beyond the mountain opened. Not fully, but enough. Enough for Krell to see, to feel. The thing that had made the blade. That had watched Vortigan die. That now hung behind Halbrecht like a puppeteer drooling joy. Akalith, a demon prince of mirrors and madness, shifting constantly, one moment a child of glass, the next a weeping woman with 6 faces. Then a massive eye that pulsed like a heart. It saw her. She screamed, not aloud, but inwardly, her mind splitting down the middle. And she cast the banishment, the cost of defiance. For a moment all of Ironfire screamed. The fortress shuddered, its brass veins turning white-hot. A pulse of light, cold and violet, exploded from the ritual site. The blade withered into ash. The symbols on the floor burned black into the stone. And something was pushed back. Not destroyed, not slain, but wounded. Akaleth screamed through the gate, his voice the sound of books burning and dreams dying, and was dragged back into the void. The gate slammed shut, and Krell collapsed, her robes aflame, her soul half-shredded, her eyes smoking. Grendel knelt beside her, bloodied, one arm hanging loose. "You did it," she coughed. "I didn't do it for you." Then she smiled, a small, terrible smile. "I did it for him." Her eyes rolled back. And the siege was not over, because from the northern ridge Halbrecht's army arrived, banners high, blades ready. He saw the fortress. He saw the dead, and for the first time he hesitated, because the gate was closed. But what else had come through before it shut? Chapter 14. The Betrayer's Crown. The sky above Ironfire Bastion had ruptured. The storm no longer resembled anything of the mortal world. Black lightning spiraled through a whirlpool of aurora-like flame, bending gravity, warping sound. Screams echoed from nowhere and everywhere. The fortress itself trembled, bricks bleeding molten brass, battlements reshaping themselves into faces twisted in agony. This was no longer a battlefield. It was a throne room for a god that should not be. And in its heart, two men met. The confrontation. Grendel stood atop the ruined causeway, his armor barely holding together, strapped with bone, sewn with scavenged mail, painted in the blood of monsters and men, one eye swollen shut, fingers broken, ribs cracked. But he stood, his blade dragged behind him like a tail of steel. Across the stones, through smoke and shattered bone, came Halbrecht. Cloaked in warped plate, crowned with a flickering halo of warp light, his eyes gleamed like molten sapphire. The ring on his finger pulsed with life, its carved eye blinking in rhythm with the heartbeat of the demon that watched through him. Behind him, hundreds stood, zealots chanting, soldiers watching, afraid to blink. "Alrik," Halbrecht said, voice smooth and deep. "You've always been a man of the old world, but that world is gone." "You're not him," Grendel growled. "No," the thing in Halbrecht's skin admitted, "but he was mine. From the moment he bled his ambition into the stone, every dream he had I twisted, every fear I fed, every doubt you planted." Grendel stepped forward. "I'm going to kill you," he said. The demon chuckled through Halbrecht's mouth. "Then come and try." The duel. They clashed beneath the bleeding sky. Steel shrieked against steel. Sparks erupted with every blow. Halbrecht moved like a serpent, graceful, impossible. Every strike was too fast, too perfect, unnatural. His sword hummed with sorcery, each arc of its blade leaving after-images of fire. Grendel was slower, heavier, but implacable. He fought like the mountain itself. Every blow was meant to end. He drove Halbrecht back through sheer brutality, smashing stone underfoot, carving through parries and spells with raw will. Halbrecht's blade pierced Grendel's side, a deep, hungry wound, the steel drinking his blood. Grendel responded by breaking Halbrecht's collarbone with the hilt of his sword. They screamed at each other, not words but grief and betrayal given voice. Then the ring split open. It uncoiled into tendrils of light and shadow, wrapping around Halbrecht's wrist, shoulder, neck, piercing him. His body convulsed, flesh peeled like bark, eyes burst, weeping molten gold. His chest split open into a vertical mouth of screaming runes. And Arkaleth, the demon prince, emerged. The manifestation. The form that rose from Halbrecht's ruin was not of this world. It wore 1,000 faces, all shifting Grendel's, Krell's, Vortigan's, even the Emperor's. Its wings were made of scrolls and sinew, flapping against reality. Its voice was not heard, but inflicted, a choir of crying children beneath a thunderstorm of prophecy. Its laughter tore paint from the walls. Men died just from looking at it. Skin bubbled, teeth exploded in jaws, armor cracked. One priest imploded, pulled into a point of light, and erased. Grendel dropped to one knee, his strength fading, blood pouring from his side. And then Krell appeared. The sacrifice. She was no longer the woman she had been. Now she was half spirit, eyes like hollow lanterns, mouth stitched with black light. Bones orbited her in a ring, some human, some not. Her staff pulsed with raw death magic, each rune glowing with the names of the dead. She stepped onto the broken bridge between worlds, unfazed by the demon. Arcalith turned its many heads. "Child of Ash," it sang, "you were never meant to live. Come, join me. I will show you the shape of all things." Quell didn't respond. She lifted her staff and drove it into the stone, unleashing the final spell she had etched into her soul, the binding of unmaking. The circle around her erupted. Spectral chains of bone and frost lashed the demon's limbs, wrapping it in lightless fire. It screamed, buckled, lashed out, ripping 3 soldiers into bloody vapor. But it was trapped. "Now!" she screamed, her voice layered with the voices of everyone she'd ever lost. "Kill him." Grendel surged forward, with the last of his strength. He drove his sword into what was left of Halbrick's heart, buried it up to the hilt, roaring as the blade burned in his hands. Arcalith howled. The earth shook. Krell's body disintegrated, unraveling into ash and violet light. Halbrick's body crumpled as the demon screeched its final curse and was ripped backward, dragged through time and thought and blood, sealed inside the void Krell had created. The ring fell to the stone, cracked, dead, and then silence. Aftermath. The survivors, what few remained, stood in awe and horror. Grendel collapsed beside Halbrecht's corpse. No longer a commander. No longer anything, really. Just a man who had given everything. No one cheered. No one spoke. The sky above was still bleeding, but the pressure had lessened. And though the demon was gone, its echo remained. Chapter 15. The Crows of Steelspire. It was winter when they returned. Not the soft, silent snow of songs, but a bitter iron winter, hard, serrated wind tearing across the eastern marches, biting through flesh and steel alike. Steelspire rose ahead of them like a tombstone, its towers bristling with silent cannons, its walls weeping with frost. No horns. They came as they had left, marching in a line, but fewer. So few. Of the thousands who had once worn the mark of the Legion of the Obsidian Sun, fewer than 60 returned. Their armor was cracked. Some walked barefoot. Others leaned on splintered pikes. Their banner was gone, not lost in battle, but burned. By order of Grendel himself, cast into the warp-flecked fires of Ironfire Bastion. No one deserved to carry it any more. At their head walked Ulrich Grendel, or what was left of him, the scarred commander. He moved like a dying bull, broad, limping, wrapped in rusted plate and frayed leather, one eye gone, replaced by a length of black cloth. His beard had grown wild, shot through with silver and clotted blood. A long scar ran from his left temple down to his collar, raised and twisted. It never healed. It pulsed at night. At his belt hung Vortigan's broken blade, its tip shattered in Halbrecht's heart, its grip soaked in a daemon's bile and the blood of old command. Grendel never touched it with his bare hands. Steelspire's welcome. The gates opened slowly. No salutes, no ceremony, just a young, soft-chinned scribe, blinking in the snow, clutching a scroll and wearing a tabard 2 sizes too large. "You are Grendel?" he asked, squinting. Grendel nodded once. "I am instructed," the boy said hesitantly, "to escort you. to the debriefing cellars for your testimony, then to the hospice, and then, he glanced at the paper, you are to be discharged and the Legion formally dissolved. Grendel didn't answer. One of the veterans behind him muttered, "We bled in hell. They give us ink and cellars." Another spat into the snow. The scribe flinched. "You're not to speak of anything east of the Black Mountains. The orders came from Altdorf. By imperial decree, all actions of the Obsidian Sun have been redacted. You were presumed destroyed. You are to remain so." Grendel's only response was to push past the boy. Behind him the others followed, silent, wounded shadows. Their names would be forgotten, their stories unwritten. History had turned its back. The tomb beneath. That night, under cover of moon and silence, Grendel made his way through the catacombs beneath the fortress. Steel Spire's underbelly was older than the Empire. Built in the time of Sigmar, reinforced by dwarfen masons, lit by guttering witchlight torches, dust choked every breath. Statues lined the walls, faceless guardians who watched as the world rotted above. At the deepest level was a door marked with no sigil, only a black sun carved into iron. He opened it with a key made from Krell's last finger bone, wrapped in threads of her soul. Inside was a crypt. There was no body, only stone carved with Vortigan's name and a single phrase in Old Reichspiel. "Here lies the one who stood in the dark." Grendel knelt. He drew the blade from his belt, held it in shaking hands. The metal felt warm, still. It pulsed faintly, as if remembering the blood it drank. He laid it across the stone. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Then he turned and left it behind. He never spoke of Vortigan again. Ashes and silence. By the next dawn, the survivors of the Obsidian Sun were scattered. Some were quietly executed by witch hunters their knowledge deemed too dangerous. Others vanished into the borderlands. A few returned to lives that no longer fit them, farmers with eyes that couldn't sleep, smiths whose hammers struck too hard. No medals, no songs. The Legion was purged from the records, their insignias melted, their graves unmarked. Only the crows remained. Grendel disappeared soon after. Some say he wandered into the Grey Mountains. Others claim he joined a road warden's patrol in the Drakewald, hunting beastmen alone. One rumor said he walked into the sea. But no one knows for sure. The final watcher. Beneath Steel Spire, the tomb lies quiet. The torches never flicker. The stone never cracks. The blade lies untouched. And on the arch above the sealed door sits a single raven. It does not caw. It does not fly. It simply watches, eyes like coal, unmoving, waiting. Because in the world of gods and men, of war and prophecy, nothing ends. Not really. Not when the gods are watching. Not when the crows still circle.